Donald Trump invites Kim Jong-un for a handshake at the Korean demilitarized zone. It comes as the U.S. president prepares for trade talks with China on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Air from the Sahara Desert sends temperatures spiking across Europe. Spain struggles to control a raging wildfire, while France sets a record for highest temperature. France also sweating hard on the World Cup football field. Les Bleus failing to pull off what would have been a dream quarterfinal victory against the United States. The U.S. advances to play England in the semifinals. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. Thank you for joining us. We begin once again in Osaka, Japan, where the U.S. President Donald Trump started his day by sending out a tweet directed at Kim Jong-un. He invited the North Korean leader to meet him for a handshake at the Korean demilitarized zone. Donald Trump saying he wants to see what a, quote, real border looks like. The main event, though, at the G20 summit this Saturday is the meeting between the U.S. president and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, the two leaders planning to address their ongoing trade war. Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent in Osaka, Justin McCurry. He told us what we can expect from the meeting.
Well, expectations are fairly low. Both sides have made some fairly positive mood music, but of course they do remain very far apart on the issue of tariffs. Overnight, U.S. officials have been sort of playing down the potential for a major breakthrough. So I think perhaps the most that we can hope for once Xi Jinping and Donald Trump are in that room together a bit later on this morning in Osaka is at least at a very minimum that they will dial back the tension and also perhaps agree to restart negotiations. But I think the potential for a breakthrough, for an announcement that the U.S.-China trade war is at an end is highly unlikely. And it just remains to be seen to what extent that both leaders are going to heed the warnings that have been issued by several other G20 leaders throughout the course of the G20 summit. They've said that trade wars do not benefit the global economy. In fact, they have the potential to damage global economic growth. And that may be reflected in the final communique today. It's unlikely that there'll be any condemnation of protectionism, and that's apparently a sop to Donald Trump. But there will be, at least according to the draft, some sort of commitment to free and fair trade.
Well, those U.S.-China talks are really the big item on the day's agenda, but you were telling me earlier that they risk now getting overshadowed by a potential event. This is another potential meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un.
That's right. I mean, this is typically off the back of an unexpected tweet from Donald Trump earlier on this morning in which he said we knew that he was going over to South Korea to meet the South Korean President Moon Jae-in after the G20 summit's finished later on today. So he was due to hold talks with Moon tomorrow. And then in a tweet earlier on today, Trump said that he would be going to the demilitarized zone. That's the heavily armed border that separates North and South Korea. And that he'd be very pleased to meet Kim Jong-un there if that was at all possible. Of course, it's highly unlikely that the two will hold substantial talks or that there'll be any sort of agreement, but it would be quite symbolic if they do meet at the DMZ and, at least in Donald Trump's words, shake hands and say hello. Of course, this is months after the breakdown of their last proper summits in Hanoi, when they spent a day and a half talking about the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and then walked away without an agreement. And there have really been no significant high-level talks on denuclearization between the two sides since then. So if indeed Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un do meet at that heavily armed border on the Korean peninsula tomorrow, I think it'll be symbolic, and it may pave the way for more substantial talks a little bit further down the line.
France 24's Justin McCurry speaking to us earlier there. Moving to the African continent now, into Tunisia, where outside of the capital, the funeral was held for the police officer who was killed in Thursday's terror attacks. Our reporters were there to witness the procession. Charlie James brings you their reporting and takes a look at how the city is recovering from the blasts.
Under high security and with charged emotions, the coffin of the police officer killed in Thursday's bombings is carried through the streets. Mourners gathered in the working-class Tunis suburb of Sidi Hassin Friday for his funeral, the crowd channeling their sadness into defiance.
Tunisia is always strong. It has been for decades. We will continue to fight. There is no terrorism in Tunisia.
These attacks hurt us, but also make us stronger. Today we control all the Tunisian territories, and all the police and military forces are ready to fight terrorism. We will continue to do what is necessary to secure our country.
The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for Thursday's twin bombings, which also wounded several people. Investigators are working to determine if the bombers actually had ties to the group. Security remains high around the attack sites, but the day after, shops had reopened. Speaking at the officer's funeral, Tunisia's interior minister offered assurances to his countrymen.
Tunisians should not change their lifestyles because of these individual and isolated attacks. We live our lives normally. Countries all over the world face such attacks on a daily basis.
The shoppers and tourist buses on Bourguiba Avenue indicate life in Tunis is already pretty much back to normal.
Algerians were back in the streets this Friday for the 19th week in a row, calling for regime change. The protests have pressed on despite the resignation in April of elderly President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Algerians say they want the entire ruling class to go. This Friday saw a heavier police presence than usual, with authorities arresting one protester who was carrying the flag of the marginalized Berber minority. All flags other than Algeria's national colors have been banned at rallies by the country's army chief. Here in France, a southern town you likely hadn't heard of before today has made history. Galargues-le-Montueux set a new record for highest temperature ever recorded in mainland France, 45.9 degrees Celsius, which is over 114 degrees Fahrenheit. Warm air coming from North Africa is sending temperatures soaring across Europe. Nick Rushworth brings us the latest on the heat wave.
Germany, Poland and the Czech Republic have already recorded their highest June temperatures ever, and France has now joined the club. The thermometer went above 45 degrees in parts of southern France, smashing the record of 44.1 degrees.
A heat wave of this amplitude so early in the year, in June, is exceptional. But we should expect more intense and frequent heat waves with climate change because it will accentuate the extremes.
For the first time, 4 southern French departments are under red alert, the highest weather danger level. Thousands of schools have been closed to protect children. And governments across Europe are warning citizens to take extra precautions, with the heat wave causing deaths in several countries.
There are avoidable deaths during a heat wave, because heat, sometimes stress, causes people to take risks. We have seen a significant increase in the number of drownings, 1 drowning per day since the beginning of this heat wave.
As Spain swelters, a forest fire continues to rage as a result of the record-breaking heat wave. It was sparked in the northeastern Catalonia region when a pile of manure at a chicken farm self-combusted from the heat. Despite the efforts of hundreds of firefighters, it remains out of control. Relief has come to some countries in Central Europe, with temperatures dipping down to normal. But for France and Spain, the worst may be yet to come.
Moving to South America now, where the Organization of American States is warning that Venezuela's refugee crisis may soon become the world's largest. 4 million Venezuelans have fled the country. If the exodus continues, it will reach between 7 and 8 million people by 2020, surpassing the 6.7 million people who have already fled war in Syria.
An average of around 5,000 Venezuelans are fleeing their country each day. That is the conclusion of a report by the Organization of American States, which says around 4 million people have fled since the start of Venezuela's political crisis. It's the largest migration in the region's history, the second worldwide after Syria.
The average of 5,000 Venezuelans fleeing their country every day comes to 200 people an hour. This means that if we take 1 hour to talk about our reports, 200 Venezuelans will have left their country in that time.
Venezuelan migrants are seeking refuge in neighboring countries. Their main destination is Colombia, which now has 1.3 million Venezuelans. Also in the top destinations, Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and Brazil. The OAS wrapped up a 3-day General Assembly in Medellin in Colombia on Friday, raising concerns about the impact of Venezuela's crisis on the region.
The crisis is growing. The numbers are increasing. The number of destination countries is growing all the time. And the answer to this global call is decreasing and is slower.
The organization says at least 100 Venezuelans died last year trying to leave the country. It no longer recognizes Nicolás Maduro as Venezuelan president and sees Juan Guaido as the legitimate interim leader.
Well, coming back to France now, where the women's football team was feeling the heat in more ways than one as they faced the U.S. in their World Cup quarterfinal here in Paris. There was a glimmer of hope when France scored a goal in the second half, bringing them 1 point away from a tie, but the final score was 2-1, sending the U.S. on to face England in the semifinals. Claire Rush has more on the game and reactions from French and American fans.
A free kick in the 5th minute led to the first U.S. goal from Megan Rapinoe. And it wasn't her last. The co-captain scored again in the 65th minute after knocking a cross from Tobin Heath into the back of the net. France fought on and marked in the 81st, thanks to a header from Wendy Renard. But it was too little too late for the hosts, who couldn't equalize the 2 U.S. goals. After the game, fans had mixed emotions.
We're obviously disappointed. We thought France dominated the game.
The score doesn't make the match. We had more opportunities to score. They only had 2, but they put the ball in the net.
My cousin's on the team. I'm so proud of her. Look, I'm wearing her jersey. We are so proud.
Most outstanding game I've ever seen. I haven't seen that in a long time.
I think it was a very good match, and America is the best.
I honestly think we could take it all with good teamwork and effort.
USA! USA! Team USA will now advance to the semifinals, where they'll face off against England.
As we saw there, mixed emotions on the streets of Paris, but it was all joy in Los Angeles. France 24's Alyssa Caverly sent us this report from California.
This is one of the biggest matches of the Women's World Cup, USA versus France. France were pretty tense going into this game, but they got relief early on when Megan Rapinoe scored the first goal within 5 minutes of the game. Rapinoe has been engulfed in controversy this week from her criticism of Donald Trump, but she clearly did not let that affect her game as she scored again later on. The French gave U.S. a run for their money, though, scoring late in the game with Americans on the edge of their seats until that final buzzer. We spoke to a few of them to get their reaction.
We all played soccer growing up, so to come here and just sit here and watch them win and take one for our country, it's so awesome. We love it so much. This was a tough match. We all knew this was a tough match, and I'm so proud right now. I'm so proud of them, and we support them, and we love these girls, and they're amazing, and they're strong, and they're passionate, and they've earned everything that they've gotten to this point. And I'm speechless, which is crazy because I'm never speechless.
Hats off to them. They gave 100%, and guess what? Next game they're going to fight harder.
The USA now moves on to the semifinals against England on Tuesday, where they are one step closer to defending their championship and bringing home their 4th U.S. World Cup title.
We'll have to leave it there for this edition, but do stay with us here on France 24. We'll have more news coming up in just about 15 minutes.